almost give the person the idea, even though it was your idea. Never heard from the person, never got my item, no buyer protection. It was not comfortable. I kill every plan I have. I felt settled. It's just sometimes hard. Don't want to go back there. All right, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome back to We in France. I'm Diane, and a couple of weeks ago, here on my YouTube channel and also on my Facebook page, I asked you to leave me questions in the comments for an upcoming Q&A, a question and answer session, and this is going to be it. This is part one. I actually had a bunch of questions about language learning, my experience learning French, and that's going to be in a separate video in part two, so stay tuned for that. But what I did is I went through the questions, I picked out my favorite ones, and I'm here today to answer them for you. So let's get into my Q&A part one. All right, first, I want to say thank you so much to anyone who took the time to leave a thoughtful question. I really do appreciate your participation because without you guys, I wouldn't have a channel. So with that, let's get into it. I said anything was fair game. It could be personal, professional, about life in France, back in the day, current, anything you want to know. So I am going to start off with this question from Emmanuel GD4515. And she, I said she because I'm like, it could also be a male's name, but there are two L's in Emmanuel. So yes, that is a female Emmanuel. And she asks, what are your 5 favorite places to visit in France? Now, these aren't going to be the 5 biggest tourist places that I think you should visit as a visitor, but since you asked my favorite places, in no particular order, I think I would have to start with Brittany. It's not far from where I live. I just head up by Nantes, head west or north to the coast, and I love the area. I'm from New Jersey originally, not New England, but it reminds me of New England, and I love going there in the off season, in the winter, just going to the beach, watching the waves, just everything about the ocean in the fall and the winter, even like, I don't know, early spring when it's still cold. I love Brittany. So my favorite places, I love the North Coast. If you head up to Saint-Malo, everything around there, Cancale. If you head to Morbihan and the Gulf of Morbihan, you can't go wrong. Anywhere coastal in Brittany, number one. I'd also say the Atlantic coast, which is just a hop, skip, and a jump west of where I live. So I'm spoiled that places like La Rochelle are very convenient. I think I did a walking tour, a Facebook Live, if you want to check that out. So yeah, La Rochelle, the Atlantic coast, beautiful. I'd also say the Mediterranean coast. You see a pattern here. Everything is coastal. There's water involved in my favorite places. Tells you a little bit about me. The Mediterranean coast, places like Collioure, I think it is, a little town down in that area. Anything along the Canal du Midi. We did a canal cruise there. It's beautiful. You can't go wrong. Just anywhere on the Mediterranean coast. If you fly into Marseille, you have the Calanque. Just beautiful water, beautiful, beautiful. Also, I had the privilege of visiting Corsica with my family, and that is a French island to the south of France, off the coast of Italy, right next to Sardinia, right north of it, actually. Corsica is beautiful. We went to the south, and that's one of the top vacations of my life, maybe the top vacation, just because my whole family was together. So yeah, Corsica, big time. I can't wait to go back. And I have to say, just because I live in the Loire Valley, I think the beautiful scenic route along the Loire outside of Angers, if you head east towards Tours, it's beautiful. You could see all the castles. You have Chenonceau. You have the Chateau of Angers, of course. If you want to start west and head east, you just have so many beautiful castles. Amboise is a beautiful town right along the Loire. If you head east to Tours, yeah, everything. Saumur, just that whole Loire, that stretch. I'd say those are the top places that come to mind, but it's really hard to pick. So thank you for that question. All right, next up, we have UBN Durbos. How did you get a job in France? When I first came to France, I had a work visa that was provided by my employer, which was the French Ministry of Education. I first came via the TAPIF program, the teaching assistant program in France. And at that time, I believe it was for any native English speakers under the age of 30 that had like an intermediate level, and you could legally come to France to teach part-time in French public schools. So I got a job in France by applying, then interviewing, and then coming to France for that 7-month period back in the day, and they provided a salary, a small one, but it was legal work. And then after that, once Tom and I got married and I came back to France, I had a job offer from a language school in Paris, and I found it on one of the job boards. I applied, I interviewed, and they offered me the job. I did decline it because the pay was just a few €100 a month over the SMIC, and it just wasn't going to cut it living in the Paris area. So I declined that job, but I found it on a job board, and then I applied. I will say that when I eventually did move to France, I did work for myself. I'm an auto entrepreneur. And any clients that I've had over the years, it's all been through networking, through people I knew who knew someone, just by putting myself out there, tapping into my network from my professional experience back in New York, and then other freelance work I had done. It was all word of mouth. All right, next from Semi LVR. Hello, you mentioned a story about being scammed in France. What happened? Yes. So I think when we come to a new place, we often have the mindset of like, when in Rome, do like the Romans. And my first couple of years here, I probably took that to a little bit, I took it a little bit too much to heart, and things that wouldn't necessarily pass my gut check, I ignored red flags because I'm like,
oh, you're a visitor in France. This must be normal. This is how the French do things.
And that's just not always the case. Things do not always work that way, and you should always be vigilant. And I've learned my lesson. But basically, something you'll notice right away in France, this was even more common like 10 years ago, is wire transfers were very common ways to pay for things like apartment rentals. If you buy something online, you had something in French at the back of your checkbook or on your online banking, a RIB, R-I-B, and it's basically your banking information that you can send to someone so they can transfer you money. Well, in France, I don't even think Venmo exists, and Cash App isn't really as popular. People do person-to-person bank transfers, wire transfers. I knew that was normal. But long story short, I went to buy something for my YouTube channel, a few €100 on eBay. It was a good deal, not too good to be true, but like a good deal. And the person said, no, they don't accept PayPal. You do a bank transfer. And that was one of the options on eBay. And I didn't think much of it. And I sent the money to the online bank, Nickel. Never heard from the person, never got my item. I had no buyer protection on eBay. So I learned right there, if something doesn't pass the gut check, if something says, I don't want to do a wire transfer, that's weird to me, then don't do it. Don't just blindly accept. When in France, that must be how the French do things, because it can get you in trouble. And it did. So I learned my lesson. Be vigilant and don't always accept things for what they seem. No one wants to be scammed or have their info stolen online, so we always need to be vigilant regardless. And I have learned my lesson the hard way. But to help keep your web browsing experience safe and stress-free, let me introduce you to NordVPN, the sponsor of today's video. Thank you to NordVPN, and you will definitely want to check them out via my link below. Now, their virtual private network, VPN, helps you stay safe online, whether you're home or abroad, especially when using public Wi-Fi networks when you're out and about. You'll be protected from things like malware and hackers. Your data will always stay private, and your online activity will not be tracked. NordVPN basically tells the internet to mind its own business. You can browse the web without worrying about prying eyes, annoying geo restrictions that block websites, or just that creepy feeling of constantly being watched. You can think of it as a fence that keeps your internet safe by encrypting your internet traffic and protecting your online identity. Now, all you have to do is download the app onto your smartphone, which looks like this, and you could browse safely and privately with the fastest VPN on the planet. If you're not using a VPN in this day and age, it is time to start. Now, one account is going to protect up to 10 devices, and NordVPN offers 24/7 customer support and a 30-day money-back guarantee. So buy with confidence. To start browsing safely now, risk-free, grab my deal. It's an exclusive NordVPN deal. You get 4 months free on a 2-year plan. It's affordable. Check it out, and thank you again for NordVPN for sponsoring this video, and back to my Q&A. All right, next, with love, Mar. Hi, Diane. She asks, thanks for the opportunity. You're welcome. How does being self-employed in France affect the give and take you experience in terms of taxes versus benefits received, taxes paid, versus benefits received, like healthcare, for example, especially compared to how it is in America? And there's a part 2 that I'll get to in a second. So being self-employed in France means I pay my social charges. I pay the cotisation. I also pay all my own taxes. Whereas if you're employed in France by an employer, a lot of times they pay your cotisation, those social charges for unemployment and maternity leave and all that. They pay that on the back end. But when you're self-employed, you get to pay them. So I pay into the system, always have, pay my taxes. And as a legal resident here, I'm not a citizen, but as a legal resident here, I have the same benefits as a French person or as a foreigner employed by a company, someone who's not self-employed. So in France, it's not like the US in that there's all these healthcare plans to choose from, especially if you're self-employed, and there's deductible and non-deductible and, high limit and this and that and co-pays. You don't choose your healthcare plan. It's the Sécu. You pay into the system. You get the same coverage as everyone else. Now, that said, there is something called a mutuelle, which I've talked about before. That is top-up insurance. It's an additional insurance that I would say 99% of people have. That I do pay out of pocket with Tom. I think we pay like 100 and something a month for the two of us for middle of the road coverage. So you get a little bit more coverage than just the Sécu. I hope that kind of answers the question. Being self-employed doesn't affect my benefits, if that's what you mean. You don't get like fewer benefits or anything like that if you're self-employed because you're still paying into the system. Then you also ask, with healthcare being seen as a right, what is the self-care, self-development scene like in France? This one's kind of hard to answer. I'm not sure exactly what you had in mind. I would say, there are self-development podcasts and books and everything you would find in the US in that regard. You could go for a massage, a facial, all of that. I'm not sure I have anything too intelligent to say. Feel free to email me if there was something specific on that. I'm not sure exactly what you want to know. All right, next up, Lil Bats asks, what is something future self could tell past self to make it easier to navigate the culture earlier on? Like, man, I made it harder on myself for no good reason. I should have done this. All right, thank you for this question. It was an interesting one, and I really had to think about it. I would say the first thing is that when you're making a major life change, whatever it is, in my case, moving abroad, you need to just tell yourself ahead of time that there are going to be challenges, there are going to be difficulties. It's not always going to be easy. You're going to get frustrated, and you just need to accept it for what it is. Don't attach meaning to it. Like, you must be an idiot, or, can't you do better? You should have known better. Like, don't make stories in your head. Just accept ahead of time, get the mindset right that things are different. And with that, sometimes that means things are challenging or hard, because the thing is, things are going to be hard depending on, just how long you're abroad, all kinds of circumstances. It's life. Life is hard, right? And now you're doing it in a different culture, in a different language. And if you get upset about things, you really let them get to you. You take things personally, you get down on yourself, and that can happen to anyone, even on a good day. But if you let that become your norm, it's going to take over, and you're going to get upset over nothing, because nothing that you get upset about is going to change the reality. Also, something that's really important is, I tell you a lot on this channel about things that are obvious. You're going to notice right away, things tourists can see about the French and how culture is maybe different. Things like, you always need to start an interaction with bonjour. I've spoken about all this stuff at length, and these things are pretty obvious. But once you spend more time in France, you're going to notice there are more subtle cultural differences that maybe you didn't prepare for, or you would have no way of preparing for them ahead of time, and you just throw yourself in and then you learn. And one that I want to mention to you, which really stands out, is kind of how to go about getting your way in France, maybe in a customer service interaction, maybe, waiting in line somewhere, just dealing with anyone when something doesn't go right and you need to assert yourself and get your way. It's a little different in France. So what I mean is, in the US, you could still be really respectful and really polite, but you can assert yourself. I don't know, you got food poisoned or something at a restaurant, and you could tell the manager, hey, this is really unacceptable. I had a great time at your restaurant, but unfortunately I was food poisoned. I thought it was the fish, and, I just don't want anyone else to get sick, blah, 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 and tell them basically this is unacceptable. And, they're probably going to be horrified and obviously say sorry and give you a gift card for next time, something like that. And of course, there are people who act really crazy and rude. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying that the measure of directness in the US is different. So you can just basically say what you want, ask for what you want. And in some cases, customer service is going to bend over backwards to help you because the customer is always right and people fear bad reviews and all of that. In France, I feel like a lot of times employees and people in a service type of capacity, if you go in there acting like, the customer is always right and you have the upper hand, even if you're polite about it, that's not going to get you what you want. So you need to do this little dance. You need to learn how to finesse the conversation, and it's definitely a skill. You almost give the person the idea, even though it was your idea. You give them the idea that they should help you. So it's like their thing, that they want to help you because, they take pity on you or whatever. Don't say, this isn't right. You need to fix it. Let me talk to your manager. I'm not saying I would do that. That's not how I operate. But I'm just saying I've seen worse in the United States. That will not fly here. So just to give you an example, back during 2021, vaccines for COVID were required. If you were going to travel abroad, if you were going to leave France and expect to come back, you needed to be vaccinated. And unless you were immunocompromised or over the age of like 70 and a few other categories, none of which I belong to, you could not get vaccinated. And at that time, my mom was dying. I needed to go be with my family and I couldn't leave France. And it was very serious. I would call every day the vaccine center and like everywhere within a 2-hour radius of my house, and they were not giving vaccines to someone in their 30s. So I was defeated, obviously, but I decided to pull out my best finessing skills. And I just said, it's really a shame, ma'am. I understand you have rules, but it would be really great if there's any way you could fit me in. Just, my mom is really sick. I think she's going to pass away soon. And I really need to go see her and be there for my family. And the lady's like, oh, okay. Where's your accent from? And I said, I'm from the United States. And she said, oh, I visited New York 20 years ago. And we got to talking, right? And then at the end of the conversation, she said, you know what? On Wednesday, there's actually a spot at 9 a.m. Why don't you come? Ask for me directly, Nicole, and I'll get you in. And I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, so the rules are there. The rules are there not to be broken, but the rules aren't always as stringent as the first or second or third
Non, ce n'est pas possible.
makes it seem. And I feel like, you catch a lot more flies with sugar and honey than you do with vinegar. And, that's good advice for anywhere, but it's just a cultural difference in how you approach something. You never want to put the person that you're asking for help from on the defensive. They don't owe you anything. And they will tell you,
Ah, Pierre, il est en vacances.
my coworker is on vacation. Sorry, that's what he deals with. You'll have to wait till October. Maybe my first few months here, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. He's not here. Oh, and I went home angry. And Tom's like, well, did you insist? Did you, say, but I really need the help and I came all this way and blah, blah, blah. It seems almost kind of theatrical, but it works a lot of times. So yeah, I don't know if that made sense, but it's just a way you approach getting what you want. It's a little bit of a dance, and you want to kind of inspire the person to be the one to come up with the idea to help you because you deserve to be helped, not because you're a demanding or difficult customer. All right, next we have Michael Creans 2227. He asks, I feel like French outdoor yards and gardens have a more courtyard feel compared to American or Canadian ones, and that could possibly be because they have taller brick walls. Also on the same note, how do you feel about the garden or cultivation hobby in France? He says he loves my videos. Thank you. And they always cheer him up. Merci d'avance. Okay, thank you for the question, Michael. I have to say I have a black thumb. I kill every plant I have, I think even a cactus. So I am not on the up and up with gardening in France. I will say there are garden centers like Jardiland, Truffaut, I think is another one. Big places like Home Depot, but that are gardening centers. So you will find them. You will have no trouble getting plants, getting soil, getting tools, anything you need for a gardening hobby. A lot of people do garden. They do grow their own things. They have chickens in the backyard and all of that. So yes, gardening is alive and well. I just personally kill everything that I have. And the first part of your question, I think a lot of yards in France, they're closed off. Just culturally, there are a lot of fences and gates and all of that. I live in my town center, so each parcel of land needs to be marked off by a fence or a gate. I understand what you mean about them feeling more like courtyards. Even in suburbs in France, like bigger towns with more land, you will still find a lot of people, even ones without dogs, they do have fences to kind of gate off their property and for privacy and that sort of thing. It's just a cultural difference. But yeah, you'll find properties that are a little bit more closed off. All right, next one. Great question from Kenalong. Bonjour, Diane. Bonjour. How long did it take you to feel at home in France, or does it not feel like home yet? My answer here is that yes, at this point, it definitely feels like home. I moved to France in my 20s after getting married. Right away, we got Dagny, my sweet dog, who passed away. And we bought a house about a year after I got here. So when I first moved to France, I moved into Tom's apartment. So I never felt like I was at home there. It was just a 1-bedroom apartment. It was going to be just a place we were using as we passed through onto a house. But I feel like once I moved into a house, once I had my own space, my dog, my husband, I felt settled, in a way that maybe being single back in New York City, renting an apartment really didn't make me feel settled. So I think I felt at home here, not culturally, not with the language, not with everything, in about a year. But after we bought our house, I felt at home just because I felt secure and everything that was like making up my life at that time, if that makes sense. All right, next, kind of along these same lines, Nikki D, 7631 asks, Was it difficult for you to make friends in France? And do you get homesick at all? The French thing, yes. I find that the French, maybe like a lot of nationalities, they make very close friends in grade school, and then they kind of keep that pod of friends through life, and maybe are a little less likely to make like lifelong friends as an adult. Not always, but I feel like a lot of French people have friends that they've had since, they were a teenager, even before. So from that aspect, and also I don't live in a huge city. I tend to be more of a homebody, and it could be difficult adjusting. I did make friends with some senior citizens in the park when I would walk my dog, and I made friends mostly at the gym. I joined the gym right after coming, and I also put myself out there a lot. I went to the Mormon church. I'm not religious, but I was invited, and I said, hey, why not? Went to the Mormon church a little bit. I did meetup groups just to meet people. So yeah, I put myself out there, and I have made friends. Some of them have passed on, not passed away. My God, I said passed on, have passed through the area. That's what I meant to say. People who maybe came here on a job contract and then they moved back home or they moved elsewhere. So there have been friends that have come and gone, but the most important thing is to put yourself out there. Your second question, do you get homesick? I have to say I've been really fortunate pretty much up until the pandemic to have seen my family about once a year. Either Tom and I would go to the US or my family would come here and we'd go on trips together. And I know I'm extremely fortunate to have been able to do that. So I think that's kind of kept me connected to them, kept me grounded. And I've never had any really difficult bouts of homesickness. And I think that ties into the previous question, because I told you that about a year after moving, once I got settled here, I felt like this was home. I didn't feel like I was missing something or longing for something. Now, all that said, of course, I miss things from the US, but they're not things that keep me up at night. They're not things that I really, pine over and shed tears over. France is my home, and I enjoy when I go to the US, but I don't think I've ever had like a really terrible bout of homesickness. All right, next, user IU2MT7NT4M asks, bonjour. I'd like information on living or visiting a small town or city. I love Paris and Lyon, but I'm considering a few days in a non-touristy place. I can say some pleasantries and order from a menu, and that is about all of my French. You give practical advice. I would say go somewhere that is still worthwhile for a tourist. You don't want to go to the middle of nowhere, a rural area, because you're going to find people just living in their houses and maybe a church and a bakery just going and coming to work. There's not going to be anything for you to see, nothing fun or worthwhile. So I would say still go somewhere that makes sense for a tourist, but maybe smaller cities. My biased piece of practical advice would be come to the Loire Valley, check out all the chateaux, the castles along the Loire River. It's absolutely beautiful, especially in the spring and the fall. Do something like that, or head to one of the coasts that I mentioned earlier in my video, rent a car, go around, and just enjoy yourself, but steer clear of big cities for a different experience. All right, next, CM Cole 987 asks, do you ever experience bad restaurants in Paris? What are your thoughts? I don't live in Paris. I get there very infrequently, usually just to the airport, but yes, I have gone to bad restaurants in general, not just in France. Tom and I went to a terrible one in Brussels. And my advice there would be always check TripAdvisor, or in France, I think it's called La Fourchette, the fork, a website, and check out reviews. So that way you can hopefully avoid really bad restaurants. You're going to find bad restaurants probably everywhere, but you're also going to find a lot of really good ones. So definitely do your research ahead of time. Then I had some questions from Facebook. April Jo Larson asks, what would you say your favorite place to visit in France is? And I covered that with someone else's question. But she also asks, any places that you felt didn't live up to the hype? And what other places are still on your wish list? A place that, I don't know if it was hyped up, but just a place I did not enjoy was on I believe it was our Canal du Midi canal cruise that we did as a family. A place called Béziers down in the south. Just didn't like it. It's not that I had high hopes for it, but I felt kind of unsafe. I felt there were always like motorcycles whizzing around. I felt like, I don't know, it was just a weird vibe down there that made me think like, I don't really want to come back here. But nothing against Béziers. It could have just been a bad day or a bad time. But that was like probably in like my 10 years here, 11 years, that's like the only place that stands out. It's like, don't want to go back there. What other places are still on your wish list? So I've been to a lot of places in France, but the east of France, the north of France, and like the southeast are places I haven't covered at all. So I would say getting over to the Alps, the French Alps, anywhere that borders Switzerland would be amazing. I'd love to go to Lyon. Also, I'm a huge fan of winter and Christmas. I would love to go to the Alsace Christmas market, Strasbourg, and all those beautiful Eastern France Christmas spectacle. That would be amazing. And I've never been to Nice or anywhere on the Riviera.
On the Riviera?
Wow, I can't even talk. On the Riviera. I would love to head down there one day and check that out. All right, next up from Facebook, Chris Frank asks, is it difficult to get a driver's license in France? What are the costs to get a license and to own a car? Okay, this one, Google is probably going to be able to give you some specific numbers. So in France, to get a driver's license, you have to pass the written test and the road test. I believe that's similar in all the states in the US, at least it was in New Jersey when I got my license. In France, when you get a driver's license, you don't have to renew it. So there's no like every 4 years or 6 years, whatever. Once you get a license, that's your license for life. It does cost money though to have your test and all of that. And most of the time, especially if you're a brand new driver, 18 years old, you need to take driving lessons and they are pricey. I think the minimum is like 20 hours for a new driver and they could be upwards of 30, 40, 50 euros an hour. I had a look on the internet to see like the average price for getting a driver's license in France. And it ranges depending on where you live and all that and how many hours they think you need. But it could be upwards of like 1,200 euros all the way up to like 2,000 euros. So it's not cheap. Also, for owning a car, you have insurance, you have car registration, just like you would in the US and elsewhere. Depends on what kind of car you drive, your driver's license history, if you're a safe driver. And the one thing, cars tend to be more expensive in France, not to mention gas, which is much more expensive in France, priced by the liter. Just to give you an example, I looked up a Kia Sportage. I picked a car that wasn't French or American. Kia Sportage hybrid SUV. In the United States, starts at $28,590. And I believe the equivalent vehicle, a hybrid Sportage in France, starts at 39,600-ish euros, which is 43,300-ish US dollars. I don't know if it's an exact apples to apples comparison. The engine might be slightly different in France, but that is the base level price for a Kia Sportage. So about 28,000 US versus 43,000 US equivalent in France. So in France, though, the VAT is included. I know in the US, there's a MSRP sticker price, and then you have a bunch of other fees, including state sales tax. That's all included in France, the VAT. Next, Donna Vitanov-Krivutska. I'm sorry, I just butchered your name. You asked, how did you move things? Did you pack in suitcases or ship ahead? And what would you do differently, if anything? Okay, so when I moved to France, Tom was already living in an apartment that, it's just a one bedroom. It wasn't beautifully furnished, but it was furnished. So I didn't need to bring furniture. I came with 2 suitcases and a carry-on and a backpack and basically packed for the season that I moved, which was winter. And then I used a service that I've used many times to ship personal belongings called Send My Bag. I'll link to them below. They ship between all different countries for people who live abroad, for travelers. They ship suitcases. And I just sent clothes as I needed them, had my parents help me pack them up from the US and then ship them to me here. And then every time I would go back to the US on vacation, if I needed stuff, I would just keep accumulating and bringing stuff back as I could. So I moved in a very minimalist way, which is funny because if I showed you the rest of my office, you would probably be horrified. The amount of junk that I have everywhere. Just I'm not a minimalist person by any means. But yeah, that's how I did it. I brought 2 suitcases, sent a few bags, and that was it. What would I do differently? I wouldn't do anything differently because it was really easy and cost effective. I paid like 150 euros for an extra suitcase, a couple hundred for the boxes I sent, and that was that. Now, when we moved into our house, that was a different story because a lot of things that Tom had to be replaced. We also had to buy a dishwasher, appliances, a washing machine, a couch, all of that. So we bought everything new that we needed to furnish our house. But I know a lot of people do use moving services and send things over on container ships. That just wasn't the case for me. All right, next, Emily Kennedy. She asks, what continues to be your biggest challenge living in France? She has a few questions, so I'll stop there. My biggest challenge, I think, at this point, it's not the little annoyances or, the cultural differences. You get used to that stuff. I would say my biggest challenge, and it's not one specific to someone who lives abroad or France or anything, it's that we can't be in 2 places at the same time. And ever since my mom passed away, family has become even more important to me. So, sometimes I'll want to go to a birthday party in the US or see a family member and I'm 3 plane rides away. You know what I mean? So it's sometimes hard to be far away from people who you want to see more often. But with every life choice, there are pros and cons, and you have to make the best choice overall for you. And as I always say, make peace with the rest. So I've done that, but that doesn't mean it's easy. As I said, I work for myself. I'm very fortunate that I can travel to see my family more often. Now, ever since my mom passed away, it's important to me to get back there even more frequently. So I do, but I would say that would be the biggest challenge, just the distance. Not because I'm homesick. It's not a matter of homesickness. It's just a matter of fear of missing out, right? I have a little nephew. He's 5 and he's going to be starting kindergarten and he just graduated from preschool. It's just sometimes hard seeing things through a phone screen. But as I always say, I'm fortunate for the way my life has turned out and the path I've chosen. A lot of people deal with not being able to see their families as often as they'd like. So that's certainly not specific to me, but I would say that where my head's at now, that's the biggest challenge. You also ask, is it an unrealistic dream or bureaucratic nightmare to try to obtain citizenship if you're American and wanting to immigrate to France? I've told everyone before, I'm not a citizen. It's a path I'll probably take in the future, but being married to a French person as a permanent resident, citizenship would change pretty much nothing for me in my day-to-day life. But I understand that a lot of people do want to move to France and get citizenship. I don't think it is a nightmare. I think if you want it bad enough, you will take the steps to make it happen. There is paperwork involved. There is cost involved. There is a delay. I think something like 18 months-ish, maybe longer. You do need to have a certain level of French, but it's not insurmountable. I think, like I said, if you want it bad enough, people figure out a way. It's also not the only path to France. If people want to live in France, different visa options, different work visas. I told you when I first came to France, I was on a work visa. There are long stay visas, visitor visas, all kinds of visas. So no, I don't think it's an unrealistic dream at all. I think if we let our dreams become unrealistic in our mind, then they'll stay dreams and they will never happen. They'll never become a reality. So I think it's really important that if you want something, because life is short. If you want something, you need to go after it. Just figure out the way to get there. And nothing is unrealistic if you put your mind to it. Last question from Emily. What advice do you have for making meaningful connections with others when you are the étranger, the foreigner? I would say, first and foremost, you need to put yourself out there. If you move abroad or you move anywhere new and you stay in your house all day and don't do anything, that's going to be a problem. So when I came to France, I joined my gym. I went to meetup groups, meetup websites to find people locally who are interested in the things I'm interested in. We had Dagny. I would walk her twice a day and meet people out, other dog people. I told you I went to the Mormon church. You have to try. You have to get out of your bubble. Even if it's not comfortable, it was not comfortable. And sometimes it still isn't even comfortable, but you do it anyway. And that's really the only way to integrate, to adapt, and to learn about your surroundings. You have to put yourself out there. I would also say, this is probably good advice for anywhere, but listen more than you speak, not just to help you learn the language, but to really take time to notice what's going on around you, how people act, how they react, how things are done in France or wherever you are abroad. Just listen. Don't always be the loudest voice in the room. And someone told me a long time ago, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find a new room. So I've always remembered that. Listen more than you speak. And I think maybe most importantly, something to remember, at least once the initial culture shock wears off, is we need to accept things for how they are in France and just see them as differences. Differences that we can obviously take an opinion on, but ones that we will learn from, respect, and adapt to, really, is what it comes down to. Because I've seen so many people, foreigners in France, vocally express how much they hate this and hate that and everything's terrible and the French are so stupid and lazy and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, that's one way to look at it. But maybe if we step back and we look at it through a different cultural lens, we can learn something or we can understand at least why something is done differently, and not place judgment on these differences. I have opinions about how I'd like to do things in my home. I have preferences about, how I'd like to make a doctor's appointment, not 3 months out, but maybe within the next month. But I understand the systems in place in France, why things are the way they are. You just accept things, So I think it's really important to have that open mind mentality and be willing to, again, not only learn and understand why things are different, but then to adapt. When people don't adapt and kind of get to a place where they're okay with things, I think it can really hold you back and keep people, maybe not miserable, but keep people from living their best life, right? For lack of a better phrase. So yeah, that's really all I have to say. Thank you so much to everyone for your questions. I'm going to be back with part 2. So this one isn't too long, and that's going to be focused on language learning. So come back soon. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you take a second just to hit that subscribe button. I'm coming up on 100K. And for a YouTuber, we get a beautiful play button plaque. And it would mean everything to me to be able to get that. So if you enjoy what I do, you've been here a while, hit that subscribe. And with that, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you so much. And I'll see you back here on We in France soon. Salut!